In today's video, we're going to be diving into the upcoming pattern where there is some opportunities for snowfall and there is off and on cold in the medium range expected. Obviously, in the short range here, we do expect there to be pretty consistent cold, especially tomorrow on Friday, Saturday. Those are going to be a couple of very, very cold days to kind of finish off this long-term cool down that we have now been in. Very extreme and brutal cool down as well that we've been in for many, many days now since just after Thanksgiving, or really Thanksgiving night, if we're being honest. So we're going to dive into this. Again, opportunities at snowfall. There will be colder times, but we're going to show you some long-range guidance at the end of this video that suggests very, very cold air is going to be on the way in the medium to long range that we need to discuss. And these models are starting to look more and more bullish as far as cold overall long term. So looking very, very crazy moving forward. Let's go ahead and dive into things. We're taking a look at this afternoon. Obviously, we have this massive ridge out west and a very, very solid trough here in the east as we're still in this very cool pattern, as I mentioned. This is a classic positive PNA pattern. That really just means warm out west for those of you that don't know. And the west is upstream from the east is how I want you to look at it. The east is downstream. And what happens upstream affects what happens downstream, not vice versa. So when we see this positive PNA pattern out west, this upstream, very warm look, it causes that cold to dive into the west. It can't be everywhere. So when it has this surge out west, it causes the opposite in the east here. And we're seeing a kind of shining example of that here just on our day one look here. We've seen actually a pretty decent amount, an overperforming amount of snowfall here throughout a lot of the mid-Atlantic and northeast here yesterday into overnight. I've heard that many people got a few inches of snowfall. It was much heavier and widespread than expected. And we're already seeing snowfall for this afternoon as well. As we move into this evening, we do continue to see snowfall showers around, although they are lightening up throughout this pocket for tomorrow. We do see some lake effect snowfall persisting, although most of that is done as well. We do see that by the afternoon. This is the look again along the eastern seaboard. Very, very cold. And also for the Great Lakes and Ohio Valley, as a lot of that cold is moving in here. The peak of the trough, though, is going to be located kind of in this vicinity here. So it will be along those very far eastern states by tomorrow on Friday. As we move towards Saturday, it's still rather cool, but it is going to begin to warm. We start to see the warm pushing up. So if you're in the southeast, or perhaps if you're in the Ohio Valley or Great Lakes, you are seeing this start to warm up. And this is going to be a little bit brief. We do see the cold air still around for a lot of the northeast, mid-Atlantic, and even the northern Great Lakes here. But Sunday is going to look a lot warmer. Also, at this point, we do have a storm system moving onshore to the northwest here. Washington, Oregon seeing rainfall and snowfall, depending on your elevation. Also, Western Canada in here. So that's very interesting. And then we continue to see the lake effect snowfall. Really, it's caused mostly by low pressure at this point. So I don't even know if I'd call it lake effect snow at this point. It's just kind of snowfall happening in these areas. I want to note something as well that I forgot to note in the beginning. We do look at the GFS and the European model here on the channel. And the GFS model has been the warmer of the two here for a little bit. The European model is actually a very different look once we move beyond the 10th. So stay tuned for that in a moment because we're going to see a much different outlook. Historically, the European model is the better model of the two. The GFS model has had some strides this year, though, I must mention. With the hurricane season, some of our fall patterns that we had, the GFS model nailed it, whereas the European model kind of just was off with what it was calling for, a total F. But we did see the European model get a lot of what we've seen recently correct, whereas the GFS model was not as aggressive with it. So perhaps the European model is kind of turning the page. So we're going to look at both. Sunday here on December 8th, what we're seeing is a bit of a cool down for the northwest northern plains, and this ridge is around for the east. Although when you look at the jet stream, it's not nearly as aggressive as it was before. We are seeing slightly above normal temperatures here throughout a lot of the east. When you move to the southeast and deep south, we start to see a little bit more further above normal temperatures. We do see some storminess moving in from the Gulf into kind of like the Mississippi River area there. I want to keep going. As we move towards Monday, this is when things start to get really, really interesting. We see a lot of this moisture moving up towards the mid-Atlantic and northeast, where we do get some New England and Adirondack mountain snowfall here. Perhaps a little too warm for a lot of southern New England and some of New York and definitely the mid-Atlantic, but we are seeing precipitation move up. This trough is expanding out west, and we do actually see some pretty persistent Rocky Mountain snowfall happening here for Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, Utah, Colorado. There is some snowfall around here. Now, as we keep going towards Tuesday, this is when things start to turn the page again a little bit. We do see this positive PNA beginning to kind of resurge here. It usually starts with the West Coast, and we are seeing that. And suddenly, this trough is turning eastward. We see it starting to try to move eastward again. The west is upstream, the east is downstream. So what's happening out here is directly impacting everything east of it. We even get a little bit of a boundary in between these two air masses. There's not a strong low associated with it, but there is some back-end snowfall here, as you can see, for the Midwest, Ohio Valley area, and a lot of rainfall underneath it happening in this corridor as well. I want to keep going towards Wednesday because this is when things get really interesting as we see this positive PNA beginning to expand even further here. We see this trough is now centered somewhere around the Great Lakes and Ohio Valley, something like that, maybe the Midwest. We do see some low pressure here, a stronger low pressure system to the north with the dragging cold front. So this is what's pulling all the cold air eastward. And you can tell on the back end here of this cold front, we do see some snowfall in New York, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, even Virginia in the Smoky Mountains there. Heavy rainfall along the eastern seaboard here for Wednesday can be anticipated. So much needed precipitation for a lot of these areas. As we move overnight, we see that New York State, northern Pennsylvania, and New England does get some heavier snowfall in there for a time before this all moves through. And now we basically have a decent trough. It's not quite as intense as our previous ones, but a decent trough located over the east. Again, we're not paying too much attention to the colors here as much as we're paying attention to the dipping. When we see this dipping, that means colder temperatures are around, and we see a whole lot of this in the east. We see a lot of the ridging in the west. So this is what we're seeing in the west here. Something along these lines. So ridge in the west, trough in the east, colder in the east, warmer in the west. We will look at the temperatures later on, but that is the look for Thursday into Friday. Here's Friday the 13th. A little bit of a spooky day there. We do continue to see this trough. It's now centered over the east coast, but again, when we look upstream, we're starting to see colder temperatures and snowfall spread in for the west coast again, so this could spell another warm up in the east, on this model at least. Again, the European model is going to look a lot different, so let's watch that play out. There is snowfall throughout the Cascades, some of the northern Sierra Nevada mountains, and even the Rockies there. Not a whole lot to discuss in the east, but right as we take a look at Saturday afternoon, it's clear that we have taken a full deep dive in the other direction. Trough here in the west, ridge especially potent throughout the plains, and then a little bit of a softer ridge, but still present throughout a lot of the east here. Snowfall prevails. As we move towards Monday, we get something interesting here, as we're in a more of a like transient pattern. We're moving constantly like a revolving door between cold and warmth. We get a low surging between Kansas and Oklahoma. A little bit of warmer air here for the southwest trending in. And I think this cold might be back on the way to the east. We see this warm is surging for the Midwest, the Great Lakes, the Ohio Valley. The East Coast a little cooler here than its western counterparts here, like the, again, Ohio Valley and Great Lakes. Let's watch how this kind of breaks down by the time we reach Monday. And it's interesting. It's interesting. There's a lot of moving pieces here. We get this very strong low over Minnesota and Iowa here. Heavy snowfall as a result for the Dakotas, Minnesota, Nebraska, Iowa. There could be a major snowstorm. We do have a cold front here to the east and a warm front up above here. So this is what's allowing for the warm air to surge for now the East Coast, mostly the eastern, I'd say fourth of the nation. But we see cold air moving back in for the West Coast, and this could disrupt everything because this cold should be on the way to the east, but if we see the cold really quickly rebound in the west, it might not make it all the way. And we see it kind of, instead of diving eastward, it kind of goes to the northeast here. I guess we do get a little bit of a cool down there in the East Coast as things warm back up in the west. It's pretty messy on this model run. This is really hard to break down here by the time we're looking at this point because we have a little bit of like a cutoff low here, way down by the Four Corner States. Some snowfall for Colorado and New Mexico in particular. A little bit of a warming trend throughout the southwest, a little bit of a cooling trend throughout the northwest, but also warming for a lot of the Rockies. So is it a positive PNA? Is it a negative? It's hard to tell. We do have warmer temperatures to the east of this low. And then we have cooler temperatures again for the eastern seaboard with another cutoff low. So super messy look, really hard to break down for you guys. We do end up with a jet stream like this though by the 21st, something along these lines. So a little warmer in the east here at the end, a little cooler, especially throughout the better yet, the Rocky Mountains and the northern plains here, with a little bit warmer along that southwest coast. This would eventually push the cold air eastward if we see this western warmth stick around. So that's kind of how I would see the beyond this point look. More major snowfall also throughout the northern plains and upper Midwest again, as well as the northwest, but a little bit of a messy model run. It's hard to dissect, and typically we don't see that end up happening when we see weird, wacky stuff like that. Let's take a look at the European model, the much anticipated European model. We see the continued cold, the Clipper system move through here for Sunday the 8th. So we see it over Canada, some snowfall for New England and New York State. Now, as we keep going, we do see a little bit of a warm up here in the east, but we get a massive, massive trough moving in with this cold front. A little bit more snowy here for these areas. A little bit more of like a northern motion. It's a lot less of a kind of moving cold front. It becomes almost stationary, and then we see this more major low move along it here, and that's what causes more persistent snowfall for these interior eastern locations. But it's clear that this European model has us right back into a very far positive PNA here on the 12th, with very cold temperatures moving back into the east. So as you can tell, we still have a major fork in the road where we're either going to move into this very messy transitional pattern, or we're going to move right back into something very similar to what we're having, like the European model is showing here, with much more major cold air on the way just after the 10th of December. Look at that trough in the east. This would be right back to the brutal cold temperatures for the 12th, 13th, maybe even a bit of the 14th here, before we kind of reach a flatter jet stream look overall. And then we start to get warmer air still trending in for the west, but we get these much quicker and more minor cooldowns in the east. It would still be cool, not very warm, but not quite as intense as what we're seeing, I guess, is the big trend here. Still a lot of storminess in the east, though, throughout this model run, just like the GFS model. Total precipitation, speaking of storms, we do see quite a bit for the northwest. Not quite enough to be above average, though. They need a lot. But look at the east. It's so needed for all of these areas. And pretty much everybody is in the 1 to 2 inch range here in the eastern, almost 2/3 of the nation. This is tremendous news for these areas that really, really need the precipitation. I mean, we're looking at 1, 2, maybe 3 or 4 inches for some of these spots that have seen almost nothing over the fall time. The anomalies look great as well. I mean, the west is very dry. But we do see the plains especially seeing far above average precipitation here, and we're looking at near normal to slightly below normal for the east, which is much better than the far below normal precipitation we've seen for months now. So still tremendous news for all of these areas. The total snowfall here, the GFS model, obviously a little bit less here in the east. We do see some of those mountaintop locations getting close to 10 inches, maybe a bit more over the next 15 days, but very limited snowfall. The west is where that kind of shines bright, and also the northern plains here in upper Midwest where we get some snowfall. The European model, what we end up seeing here is a lot more in these areas where we end up getting a solid 10 to 20 inches throughout the mountaintop locations over the course of multiple snowfall events. And then we get a little bit more widespread snowfall throughout the kind of northern plains, upper Midwest area. And we still end up with quite a bit for the mountainous west, which is kind of good news for almost everybody here. As we take a look at the temperature pattern, here comes that cool down here for, again, tonight into Friday here, very cool. Into Saturday, still cold along the east. We start to warm for Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. Again, the European model is going to be much colder, so wait a second for that. But we get this kind of weaker cool down for Thursday, Friday, Saturday here in the east. It still lingers for the East Coast like Sunday, Monday, but we do see warmer air overall start to prevail. And then that's when it gets really messy, kind of warm across the board. This typically doesn't end up looking this way when we see weird stuff like this, as I mentioned. The European model, though, we get this major cooldown that moves and sticks around. Brief warm-up for Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, but look at Thursday. Stark difference. Let me look at Thursday at the 18Z mark. Let's backtrack. This is the difference. Here's the GFS. Here's the European. I hope you can see the huge difference in the amount of cold located in the eastern states. So if the European model is correct, we are going to see far more cold and far more intense cold in the east here. As we keep going, that sticks around for Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, many more days. And we do eventually warm coast to coast on this model as well. I would say the models are at a crossroad for the very long range, like the 15th through the 20th. That's still very far out, so it's nothing to be too concerned about. But seeing this coast-to-coast warmth, typically you're going to see cold in the west or the east and then warm in the other one, usually not across the board. So we'll see what happens. This does happen sometimes. It's just a lot more rare. But my current thinking is that we will get a different look here at some point over the coming days. Now, again, for that long-range model guidance that I told you guys we would talk about, here is the 6th through the 11th, cold in the east, warm for a lot of the west. Here is the 10th through the 15th, kind of cold in the east, warm out west, but a lot less cold in the east. Here's the 15th through the 20th, same story. Here's the 20th through the 25th, though, that Christmas time frame, and we start to get more major cold air moving into the east by this point, according to this model. Keep in mind, this is just after our previous models ended, so this is kind of like the beyond time frame. This is days 15 through 20 from now. As we take a look at the 25th through the 30th, still cooler in the east, I would say. Then here is the 31st through the 5th, colder in the east. Here's the 5th through the 10th, getting a little bit more intense. This looks a lot more like that Christmas time frame. And then let's go ahead and take a look here at the 10th through the 15th, and all of a sudden this model starts to go crazy with the cold air in the east. Typically, you wouldn't see the cold over the west as well. I would say we probably see more warmth than this if we get this amount of cold air in the east. So a little bit unrealistic here, but clearly the majority of the cold air is kind of in this pocket here. And this is a crucial time in the upcoming winter, the 10th through the 15th of January. This is the peak low temperatures as far as your averages are concerned. So to see these 15 to 25 degree below normal temperatures in those magentas and kind of purplish blues would be very, very cold, especially when considering it's a 5-day period we're looking at here. It would be even colder at certain times. And then here is the 14th through the 19th. It gets even worse. Look at the amount of cold air over the east. This is probably the coldest pattern I've ever seen a long-range model suggest. It is very far out, but very fun to look at. We do see even 25 to 35 degree below normal temperatures here in these magenta shades. So these pockets here are very, very cold. Very interesting to see. I wonder if there's any truth to it. If this is a sign of anything, it's that more cold air is on the way at some point during this winter, and it's not going to be a total torch like most people have pessimistically been stating. Now, the precipitation we see, I want to take us to the longer range because it's no real surprises, coming up, but we see a Midwest and Plains kind of look here for the 15th through the 20th. The 20th through the 25th, which looks very cold in the east, remember, we get the precipitation matched up with the very cold temperatures. This could be huge because we've yet to see this winter. If we get these above normal precipitation areas in very cold conditions, I'm sure we will see some major snowfall events in that type of combination. The 25th through the 30th of December does dry up a bit, and that doesn't mean there can't be snow. It's just less chance, obviously. 30th through the 4th, obviously a little drier. And we kind of stick in the drier area until that 10th through 15th of January, which is that kind of historically cold look. So this would be absolutely crazy. And then here is the kind of beyond the 13th through the 18th when it gets even colder. And there is pockets of high precipitation in here as well. So again, it is a very far out outlook. Keep that in mind, but very fun to look at. And there could be some takeaways. I don't think it's going to look exactly how this model projects. I never think that about any model run, but I think that it could be a sign that we're looking at some bigger picture, colder patterns moving forward, maybe even long-term spells of cold because of things that these long-range models take into account, like the AO, the ENSO, the PNA, the PDO. All of these things are things that this type of long-range model takes into account, and this means that this model is projecting those types of anomalies to move into favorable phases. Very good news for cold and snow lovers. Anyway, we upload every single day, so be sure to subscribe. You can even hit the bell icon for daily notifications when we upload so you never miss one. Be sure to like the video if you did enjoy it, leave a comment down below, and I'll see you guys in the next video.